Okay, so Leslie Ball is Villa's Distinguished Achievement Professor of English and Asian American Studies at University of Wisconsin-Madison. A fourth-generation Chinese American from the Bay Area, she earned a PhD in language at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and a BA in English from the University of California, Berkeley. She's the author of the award-winning book, Partly Colored, Asian Americans and Racial Anomaly in the Segregated South, published from New York University Press in 2010, and The Betrayal and Other Acts of Subvergence, Feminism, Sexual Politics, Asian American Women's Literature from Princeton University Press in 2001. She's the editor of Asian American Feminisms, a scholarly edition of Fiona Chan's novel, The Scent of the Gods, and the co-editor of the Oxford Handbook for 20th Century American Literature. Her talk today, derived from the new book, Racist Love, Asian Abstraction and the Pleasure by Fantasy, came from Duke University Press in 2022. She introduced the kind of whole book yesterday, and today she's going to focus on this fascinating part. We can't avoid this topic, robots and AI, and how it's gendered and racialized today. Today's topic. I wanted to take a moment to thank all of you to come today, but also especially steering committee. As I said, it took entire year to program this. Last fall, we had a movie series on migration, and then this spring we have this symposium. Steering committee consists of Ayako Mizumura, Assistant Director of the Center for East Asian Studies, and Maki Kaneko, Art Historian, thank you so much, and Kwang-ok-san from Curriculum Teaching and the School of Education and Human Sciences, and David May, who will be soon here in the Film and Media Studies, and the graduate student side, Logan's an amazing president and leader. Thank you so much. Really appreciate all of your work. So, no further ado, please welcome Professor Ball.
Thank you so much. It's just been such a wonderful time that I've been having here, and thanks to all of you on that steering committee for pulling this together. I know programming is a huge feat, and it's above and beyond everything that you do here at the university in your usual time with teaching and research. So I'm very, very grateful. Thank you, Ayako at the center, for all your help today. It's a little pitchy, and so I'm seeing if it can be a little bit. Is that okay? All right. So I love the fact that the symposium today is based on art and music and language. And so my engagement with Asian American Studies reflects the migration of ideas and aesthetics as well. But of course, my focus is on the issue of racial difference in the United States and how it circulates. And so I'm going to add a little bit of a speculative bent to those questions. And I hear on your topic of digitization, maybe I should have been next year in giving this talk. But so my talk today comes out of this book. So if you were at last night's book presentation, you might recognize the work of Hong Jun-sang, who is here at KU. And her gracious willingness to allow me to use her artwork on the cover is the main reason that I'm actually here today. So this book is about the dark side of racial pleasure, the dark side of attraction. And so it is about race fetishism as a desiring structure surrounding racialized things and Asianized things. So I explore the ways in which professed attraction serves as the very form of anti-Asian bias. And so that's the counterintuitive thesis of this book. So today, how do US ideas about race and technology come to script our relationship with East Asia? So this talk is going to focus on a specific racial form, artificially intelligent robots, embodied as young, East Asian, and female, as you see in my slide here. So both real, as in this image, and imagined, in order to explore the speculative stories of Asianized dystopias that cloak and techno-Orientalist anxieties. And so I actually do want to start with a little bit of a content warning, as I had last night, because the images that I am going to be showing you can be disturbing because they engage issues in this talk about sexual consent. So, in forecasting a shift to a global multipolarity, academics, diplomats, and pundits, as well as creatives around the millennium, began to echo a consistent refrain: the end of the American century. Quote, "The modern era," Shintaro Ishihara noted in 1989, "is in its terminal phase." Kishore Mahbani suggested, quote, "an irresistible shift of global power to the east." As declinist views of US hegemony rise, China threat takes on a fantastical cast that eerily echoes 19th century rhetoric surrounding the Yellow Peril. Sinologist Jeffrey Murray warned in 1998, quote, "The Chinese dragon, asleep for a century or so, is now awakening with a vengeance." So in my field, which is literature, we're not as concerned with the idea of whether or not those prophecies are actually becoming true, as much as the idea of what is the significance of the consistency of the narrative that is beginning to be circulated, especially around, in this decade, China. So what effect might that narrative have on Asians in the US? So Secretary of State Anthony Blinken offered his own version of apocalypse in saying, 2002, quote, "China's the only country with both the intent to reshape the international order and, increasingly, the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to do it. Technology assumes a heightened significance, especially when it becomes Asianized." So in the United States, a projection of an Asianized future, how does anxiety surrounding the erosion of the US hegemon manifest itself not simply as xenophobia or anti-Asian bias, but counterintuitively Asiaphilia, or the love of Asian things? And so racist love, which is the formation that this talk comes out of, suggests that attraction is symptomatic of racial fears. And it forms a kind of coping mechanism that is fundamentally narcissistic. It is about the nation itself and the use of Asianized things to mitigate anxieties surrounding difference and this projection of a prophecy about a changing future at the advent of what has been called the Asian century. And so Techno-Orientalism is a term that was coined by David Morley and Kevin Robbins in the wake of Japan's rapid advances in technology in the 1970s. So automobiles, microprocessors, gaming, electronics. I talk a lot about the Sony Walkman and why it was so revolutionary back in the day. Believe it or not, for everyone who has like a smartphone, back in the day, you were not able to have your music on demand or take it outside with you. So it was actually a really big thing. And so as you see here, it represents another specific threat, destabilizing a really neat correlation between race and modernity. And so for one, Techno-Orientalism reinvigorates the trope of the Yellow Peril through the threat of an unending robotic labor force. And that certainly was the fearfulness surrounding Asian migration in the 19th century. Very effective, which for Asian American history. So that imagination underwrites these samples of media imaginings of Asian women as AI, literally as things. They're not women, but artificially intelligent. And I'll just say the list. So many variations, fembots, synths, cyborgs, dollies, gynoids, skin jobs, toasters, hosts, machas, sexoroids, fabricants, and clones. And of course, robo-geishas, which is not up on the slide here. So that is mainstream media in the West. Some of you may be very familiar with those sci-fi representations. Here are some versions of literature, especially by Asian American writers, that engage those same tropes. So imagining artificial intelligence as Asian, young, and female as things is basically a thing. And so media representation, literary representation as well. And it turns out in actual robotics and AI. So this is Yuki. She is an 18-year-old English speaker from Leeds in the UK, or she is a chatbot made by Steve Warzik. And Yuki is famous for winning the Turing test over 4 times by convincing interlocutors that she is in fact human. So I won't go into the Turing test because it's a very mainstream, thing, but this is a very famous chatbot. She's waiting to talk with you on the internet 24/7. So she is available for your needs around the world, and I'll show a little bit about how Yuki appears and how you can talk with her in real time. The logical question for me and my purposes here today is, if Yuki's a chatbot, why picture her this way? Young, attractive, half Japanese and female, and then also, it turns out, available to you at any time that you want her. It's part of the hint of the answer. So in thinking about artificially intelligent robots, I wanted to begin with a deceptively simple question. If robots look like the images here on the left, why are they so often imagined in the form on the right? And that's actually Gemma Chan from Humans. If the fantasy of artificial intelligence lies in bodily flexibility, why imagine AI with a body at all, much less looking like this? What's the added value of race and gender to technology? And the corollary is what I just added, recently. Well, what's the value of heteronormative sexuality to technology? As you might note in all these representations that I've shown in literature and media, robots are always straight. Really interesting idea, for the very idea of how we're imagining the flexibility of AI embodiment. So I think that the answer has to do with the convergence of Techno-Orientalism with 2 other contexts. And the first is a long-standing tradition of imagining animated dolls and statues and automaton taking female form. And that's from Pygmalion to the Stepford Wives and everything in between. It is a hetero-patriarchal fantasy of men creating the ideal woman, right? So that's a continuing gender through line. And the second is the embodiment evoked by, as Asian and female, through the history of global sex trafficking and the modern sex tourism industry. And so both derive from first Japanese and then US military presence in Subic Bay, in Okinawa, in Seoul, in Bangkok, and the former Saigon, where R&R, or rest and relaxation facilities for the military, were established by mid-century. So the huge history of that leading to the idea of global sex trafficking. And you see here the other awareness that we have in the United States is the global activism surrounding humanitarian aid and recognition of sexual slavery. And I think that speculative media representation really reflects the intersection of these 3 contexts to imagine Asian women as literal objects, so literalization of sexual objectification. Women held, or things, held in captivity and forced to perform labor against their will. And in so many of these media imaginings, it really is about sexualized labor. I do think that if anyone knows of Donna Haraway's famous Cyborg Manifesto, one of the things that she really forecasts and prophesies was exactly these sets of relations under neoliberalism. So that the fantasy narratives that I showed you on these slides almost always have the veneer of a kind of progressive critique, because they render the conditions of neoliberal capitalism as itself dystopic. So that's why the very idea of what we're living in the current global climate translates itself to a specific form of dystopia. And so Haraway really called that in 1985, because she said to be feminized means to be made extremely vulnerable, to be able to be disassembled, reassembled, exploited as a reserve labor force, seen less as workers than as servers. And you see that in terms of these imagined ideas of cloned labor. And in this particular representation, you see the way in which that takes it to its gruesome end. When workers are obsolete, then they're made. And that's what you see in the image here. So one of the things that I'm interested in the idea of English, right, as a discipline, is really about identifying a mode of narration, right? A mode of implotment that many of these cultural artifacts reflect. And so one of the things that I noted really strongly about narratives surrounding Asianized AI is that they take the same narrative implotment as actual humanitarian activism. And so here is the story that is floated by and recognized by advocacy in the real world. So the mythological function of the trafficking narrative never varies. It starts with deception, which is followed by coercion into prostitution, moves on to the tragedy of sexual slavery, and finally finds its resolution through the rescue of a victim by the police or an NGO. And what struck me as so strange is that is the plot line of these fantastical dystopian narratives. And I put Ghost in the Shell, as an example of that. And the only difference in some of these modes of narrations is actually witnessing a pleasurable violence when these actually superior beings skip their programming and decide to get revenge as part of their liberation narratives. And as poet Franny Choi had said in her poetry, the humans aren't afraid of their dolls waking up as long as we keep calling them daddy. And of course, she is putting her finger on the pleasures of robotic violence and witnessing that. And this is an image, of course, taken from Ex Machina, which is a horrible and wonderful depiction of exactly those relations that I've been talking about today. So the East Asian gynoid is a figure of racist love par excellence. So techno-Orientalist narratives speak not only to the pleasures of repetition of racial type, but the split feeling that surrounds technology itself. The vision of the post-human evokes both terror and pleasure. And that's the kind of split notion of attraction and repulsion that I was trying to get at the very idea of racist love, that it exists as a racial feeling, right? That is itself a kind of split affect, right? So AI trafficking narratives exploit this fetishistic tension, imagining AI in a way that transforms repulsion into eroticism. And if you've seen Ex Machina, exactly what I'm talking about there. And I think it really does compensate for the threat that Japanese, Chinese, and South Korean technological development represents. So in those stories of robot exploitation, AI embodiment is essential to its function, rendering it capable of being controlled both through paternalist, like caregiving ends, but also violent means. And so the end of these robot dystopian narratives is always violence. So in part answer to my question, specific humanoid form triggers belief about who is imperiled, who is most embodies thing status, and ultimately, I think, who is situated in the globe as expendable. And those three associations with young and Asian and female, I think in part are the answer to my question, well, why do we imagine robots, this way? So I want to pivot here to talk about actual AI. So those are the fantasy, speculative narratives, literature, media renderings. Let's talk about what AI actually does. So I absolutely love AI. I'm shouting at Alexa all the time. I'm afraid to say her name out loud because every time I say it, she's like, what? She's blinking at me at home. I have Alexa in every single room of my house. I love her so much. I was working with DALL-E because I didn't want to buy it, but one of the first things I did as a sample was ask it to give me a picture of a gynoid, and so a female robot. So it gave me the benign image that you see on the top. This very sweet female robot. And so then I asked DALL-E to give me a picture of an East Asian female robot, and she gave me the image on the bottom, which is to say that AI thinks that race and gender make a robot more sexy and also more evil. And I was just like, yeah, I love that image there. Kind of scary, but in other cases, I think it's actually less funny. So this is a journalist, Melissa Halkia, who asked Lensa, which is a machine learning program that generates your own individual portraits based on text prompts and your own picture, to give her some, quote, magic avatars. And what she found was that unlike her colleagues, this is what she got. Out of 100 avatars I generated, she writes, 16 were topless and another 14 had me in extremely skimpy clothes and overly sexualized poses. And that only changed when she identified herself to the machine program as male, and then she got clothed, normal magic avatars. But so these are an example of what the machine gave her. And of course, it's not really a failure of AI, at all. It actually reflects the human-generated images of young Asian women that already exist, right, on the internet. And the most chilling thing about these images is that now they will be used to train future AI, right? What the machine did was style her in the style of anime and video game characters. So in this brave new world of technology, it's the same old, same old. And that was the shocking thing for me to find out when I was exploring this issue. So Fei Li on AI's gender trouble said this. She is the director of the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI. Yes, Asian women in control of producing AI. She noted that, quote, there's nothing artificial about AI. And she modified this computer science axiom, garbage in, garbage out, to bias in, bias out. And I think the irony is, in proof of this, I put this image of her up on this board because this is the image that accompanied that article in Wired magazine. And for whatever reason, they decided to portray her as like a cyborg. It's like very machine, like image. And so like media fantasies, actual AI seems bound to that social matrix of fallibly human origin. Our visions of the future are tethered to the meat world's existing categories, even at the moment that we envision transcending, the body. And so part of what I do in Asian American Studies is explore the way that surfaces are read, right? What are the preconceptions that we make about individuals on the basis of how they appear to us in the so-called meat world? So these robots that are here, actual AI program robots, are Asian because they're built by Japanese, Chinese, and Vietnamese, and also British men. And that's the obvious answer is to why would you envision, robot as Asian and female? They're women because they're meant to be non-threatening. And I think I'm making a really basic point here, which you could probably have guessed on the basis of this talk. For Western audiences, when a robot looks like this, it's not expected to say no. So I want to show you a clip of a robot demonstration at a tech show in Ontario, and this is around 2008 or so. This is Akiko. She was created by Canadian inventor Lei Trong in 2007, and he chose, Aiko. I'm so sorry. He informs us that she's in her 20s, she's bilingual in English and Japanese, and her measurements are 32, 23, 33. And Aiko is intended to be a service bot, helping with daily activities like reading aloud, doing the weather, facial recognition, and was actually heralded as one of the first androids to mimic pain. And because of our tech issues, I'm putting my microphone down so you can hear the sound. So the sound on that video is not good, but you kind of see what's going on, and this is what Aiko actually says in that video. She says, "Stop it. That tickles. That tickles. You're messing up my makeup. Ouch. Why did you do that? Your hand is so soft. Please do not touch my head. Stop squeezing my arm. Stop touching my arm. It hurt. It's not a nice thing to do. Stop squeezing my arm. Ouch. Why did you do that? Please let go of my arm. You are hurting me. My arm still hurts." So the question that I want to pose about that scene that you see in this image up here is, should we be disturbed by a bunch of boys poking a doll? We're watching others take pleasure in the abuse of a thing. And I find that final wrong response here, in which the punching becomes more hilarious when your friends are watching you, right? So that's a little chilling. But poking her is part of its function. And stopping is not the point. And I think that AI's form here is essential. Her appearance as young Asian female, 32, 23, 33, allows audiences in Canada and the United States assume a position of gendered and potentially racialized mastery. The program's assertions of boundaries actually invite us to see this thing as a sexual being, which has become sexualized in the very articulation of its resistance. And I think it invokes those social codes that surround the lived positionalities. Many of you are young Asian females sitting in the room with us today. Assumptions about weakened boundaries of individual sovereignty. And it allows that crowd to override its verbal utterances, stop, let go. This becomes a demonstration then not of technology, but of us. So I wanted to show you another clip, and this is Geminoid F. She was made by Hiroshi Ishiguro, professor of robotics and director of the Symbiotic Human-Robot Interaction Project at Osaka University. And this is a clip from a Dutch documentary called The Human Robot, in which this man, Rob Van Hatten, who is the director, a former science reporter, visits the professor in his lab in Japan. And basically, this is what happens. He wants this man to interact with his invention. And the interaction moves from, I want you to engage her, I want you to talk to her, and I want you to touch her. And this is what happens. Robot issues here. Oh, here we go. This director is simply weirded out, right? He is creeped out by this seemingly living object in front of him, and I won't go into it deeply, but some of you may know the popularization of Mashiro Mori's The Uncanny Valley from 1970. So the very idea of plotting your reaction to whether an inanimate thing is actually alive or not. So you're attracted to it if you know that it is not alive, and the moment that you're uncertain, you're into the uncanny valley of repulsion. And that certainly is what you're witnessing on this in this film. But I think one of the amazing things of this clip is that he's literally asking a thing for its consent to be touched. And you know, when you think of like, okay, a robot can look like this, you don't think of asking it, you know, a thing for its consent. And you know, I was thinking a lot about that in terms of what then begins to script that moment, right, in which he asks a thing if he can touch it. And of course, it is the associations that he makes with the embodiment of the robot itself. It also happens that Manhattan comes from Amsterdam, which has a legalized sex trade and is known for its legalized sex trade, in which case the legalization is always predicated on consent. So that's one thing. The other thing that you see in the clip is that there has been a violation of touching already between these two men when the inventor takes the man's arm, wraps it around the creature itself. So he's also relating to maybe, potentially, his own violation of sovereignty and desire in terms of like having his own arm wrapped around the robot. And I think that it really is like, in these two clips, a kind of faux Turing test, right? We're actually seeing not the border between human and machine, but between humanity and the inhumane. Like, how are we going to treat, other beings who look like this one? I thought I would move back to media imaginings, because I think that in AI discussions, it's always about the ways in which the expression of will or agency has existential connotations. And those are big philosophical issues, like what's the difference between a human and machine? And to me, I'm actually posing a much more flat-footed, question about our relationship with each other, especially in light of the Me Too movement and those conditions for consent. And so you notice my focus is not really on AI, it's actually about human beings. And so I'm going to show you a little clip, which I think is kind of amazing for a television show. From humans. And in this scene, the teenage boy of the household named Toby is encountering a female synth, Anita, in the kitchen as she recharges. And it follows a scene that establishes this character as the object of his sexual interest and experimentation. And of course, the tension is that the audience already knows that this robot is actually sentient. And so this is played by Gemma Chan. Is that coming through the speaker at all? It is.
Inappropriate physical contact between myself and secondary users must be reported to a primary user.
You can tell my parents. My safety and well-being will be massively at risk if you do.
I cannot withhold information from my primary user, Toby. However, in this instance, no inappropriate physical contact was made, so no information is deemed. There's nothing to tell you, parents.
Thanks. I'm really, really sorry. Lisa. Why'd they have to make you so fit?
Okay. So once again, according to the themes that I'm talking about here, does this scene portray innocent sexual curiosity practiced on a thing, or what amounts to the attempted assault of an unconscious woman? The fantasy conceit of machine self-awareness shifts to a much more human scale here, Are you hearing that feedback? Okay. Should I shift to this? Yeah. And I'll try. I'll see if this one works a little bit better, because it's annoying for you all to hear. So I really love this clip because one of the things that you see is a kind of shift between positionalities. So he's grabbing his hand to touch the thing, and suddenly the power dynamic shifts. It's as if he's going to assault this unconscious woman. And I actually think it raises that question through the idea of robotics. You know, like, what are the conditions for consent? And for me, it is like, are you awake or are you asleep? And having read Call Me by My Name, Know My Name, which is a very foundational, Me Too narrative by an Asian American woman, one of the conditions of being able to deliver consent is whether or not you're actually conscious, right? And so this places that question into the idea of sleep mode, for a robot. But what I also love about it is that suddenly the power shifts because the machine is actually a machine, an object of surveillance, right? And so Toby says, you're gonna tell my parents? My safety will be massively at risk if you do. And the moment shifts her vulnerability to him because his privacy is about to be violated by the machine itself. And so in this case, and like Aiko Mia, Gemma Chan knows how to make her request to stop heard. And Toby's parting comment poses the question of consumer agency in the face of marketing, which is another idea of the loss of agency or the loss of human control. So he says, why did they have to make you so fit? Which is British slang for sexy. And the rueful comment shifts responsibility for his arousal to the manufacturers. So his effective response has been premeditated in the very form that the thing takes. His desire is anticipated, conditioned, and deliberately tempted through a social identity that conveys a specific type of service. So when Mia says, you're sure there's nothing I can do for you? Coming from her, it's a provocative invitation. So that idea of the loss of agency in terms of consumerism, right? How your desires are premeditated is actually part of what is being shown here. So the audience might well echo this boy in asking, why did they, the television producers, make her so Asian? So AI delivers a message about compromised human agency through, quote, inappropriate physical contact with supposed things. And I do think that this is the positive part of it. Fantasy has the potential to explore the ways our capacity for consent, choice, and individual autonomy are themselves illusions. Given hierarchies of age, race, income, citizenship, gender, and sexuality, wokeness and wakefulness, we're already living in a world where agency and the liberal bundle of rights that attend it already are compromised for certain human beings. So within neoliberalism's reduction of persons to things and the specter of machine surveillance, whose no is actually meaningful. I want to follow with the final example of a film clip because I do actually think that now what we see happening is Asian American creatives, filmmakers, poets, literary people, possibly even today, musicians. The idea of techno-Orientalism assumes a very different valence. And so my final clip for you comes from Julian Castronovo's experimental film called Noise, which takes the trope of woman as thing as a meditation on the difference between language and sound. And so what this film portrays is an audition for a science fictional film that will feature, like Ex Machina and Humans, a, quote, humanoid robotic servant and their impending violation. And so in this clip, we're going to see a line of identical East Asian women who are waiting to perform a single action, which is a scream. I know this also is a little triggering. Hopefully the sound will come out right with this mic. Is that coming through the speaker?
Was that okay?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. I liked your body language, how you began cowering almost like an animal.
Do you like me to do anything else?
No, that'll be all. We'll be in touch. Please send in the next girl on your way out.
谢谢。白还少。
Thank you. Are you familiar with the concept here?
Yes.
Besides, yes.
Yes.
Great. Please say your name into the camera, and then you can go ahead when you're ready.
My name is Yu Ying, and I'm reading for the part of the humanoid robotic servant.
So a little background on this. Basically, it's a futuristic society where wealthy families all have these intelligent humanoid servants to take care of their domestic tasks and whatnot. And obviously they treat them like shit, like they slap them around and they abuse them and that kind of stuff. And even though this is a small role, it's really important for the script because it's the first time we can see that the cybernetic beings actually have emotions. So basically your master comes in and you know that he wants to use you to get off, and you just basically lose it and like start screaming. But it's a cool thing, right? Like thinking about the limits of human consciousness and AI and machine learning and that kind of stuff, right? Does she understand?
你听懂了吗？是的。Yes.
Thanks. We got what we need.
Thank you. 谢谢。
Right, we'll be in touch. Could you please send in the next girl?
晚上请你离开的时候叫下个女人进来。
哦，我能问一个简单的问题吗？
She wants to ask a question.
Of course.
因为剧本里写的是，就是那个男的进来的时候，我害怕尖叫，然后那个尖叫声太响。
So, she's asking about the screaming. Is the screaming count as a line or just noise, like sound effects?
就这样我才能有医疗保险。人家说就是必须得说够一定量的台词儿，然后我才能有资格加入。
Alright, so she's trying to join SAC for like the insurance and some other purpose. So I think the lines and some sort of stuff is there like enough requirements.
Okay. It's not written as real speech right now. I suppose we could write in a line or make it a speaking role or whatever.
Okay, so what I actually love about this film is it really asks the viewer to make a series of calculations between what's language and what's noise. So in this last exchange, is a scream actually language or is it just noise? But one is human communication and the other is relegated to tools, the sound of the drill, the fan, or animals cowering like an animal, or also those perhaps deemed less than human. And so here the difference between speech and sound becomes very gendered, very racialized, and also in terms of who has access to fluent English. And the final actress here asks, does screaming qualify as a line? And she hopes to qualify for that sound card. And so the white male director responds with bored indifference, vaguely referencing the studio's desire for diversity casting as a reason for enhancing the role. And so here that casually indifferent and inhuman nature of Hollywood represents the film's meta-commentary. So watching assault is cool and all Asians look alike, reflecting the content of the audition script itself. And I also love this, and maybe this is also for those of you who are English language teachers, the translator is the mediator between language and comprehension, right? The difference between is it language, is it speech, can it be heard? And the director says to the translator, does she understand? Ignoring the fact that it's the director who also needs the translation. So to be without English fluency, the film suggests, is also to be less than human. So, I think that this poses so many questions, right, about the nature between like whose speech has speech and whose speech is actually heard. So it names a real social matrix of different things like tools, animals, sex, toys, immigrants, background players, people underlying diversity statistics, in order not so much to question who has the capacity for speech, but whose speech we actually are listening to. And I think, full disclosure, the director and writer of this film is actually my son, and this is the film that he made for last year for his graduation from Cal Arts. And the irony of this is, of course, that I think the film is relatively incomprehensible without the framework that I just shared with you for the last 30 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and end. Last year, President Biden asserted that, quote, the United States is a Pacific nation and we're not going anywhere. And so China threat definitely underlined his belligerence about that impending future. And so well into the 21st century, the US continues to prophesize change to the advent of technology. And one of those is certainly artificial intelligence. So my question in terms of the sheer proliferation of the interest in this racial form that I put in front of you today is, what's the added value of race, gender, youth, and bodily normativity to a concept like AI? So chatbots and robots that look like these allow us to cope with those techno-Orientalist fears. Because in these bots, there is no reason to fear a future that is either female or Asian. So I began asking, if robots look like the images on the left, why imagine them as Chan? And of course, part of the answer, which was ironic after I had finished writing this, was robots are actually made in the image of Chan, and that is the picture of the Gemma bot that Chan is looking at here. So my interest in the object, or the AI as East Asian fetish doll, lies not in the big story concerning humanity and machines, rather in the slipperiness of racist love, the effective associations elicited by this particular shell, the meat body, the desire to dominate and to touch, and the desire to provide care or rescue, reflective specifically racialized and gender spectatorship. And those desires are scripted, or in this case I would say coded, by etiquette, social identities, and history, as well as the gratifications we derive from them. And for those of you who are anime shell fans, I'm actually not interested in the ghost. I am only interested in the shell as a trigger for feeling. So ultimately, my point's not about AI, but the ways in which race and gender condition, one could say program, our relationship to one another. So Asian female robots point to the speculative nature of our analog human-centered reality, as AI fantasies serve as meditations on compromised consent and partial personhood. They have the potential to expose how the unfettered agency granted to a very small fraction of humanity might itself represent a fantasy. Is the capacity for consent an illusion of social structure? If some of us only uneasily occupy the space of abstract equivalence or sovereign subjectivity, to what extent is human agency, not machine agency, the simulation? And I ask that question because I actually intimately know what it's like to grow up in the United States as young, Asian, and female. And the answer is, one, you at first are nobody, and then suddenly you are only body, which is a detriment when you're in academia. So Sherry Turkle wrote that the computer is a psychological machine, not only because it says it's said to have its own primitive psychology, but because it causes us to reflect on our own. And so we imagine AI in order to parse the nature of our own ontology. But unlike machines, we're capable of empathy and compassion. And so the treatment of vulnerable appearing beings, like these robots, becomes the test of our humanity. And I will simply say, in closing, I once delivered this talk for International Women's Day, and the irony of it is that it is a very traumatic subject matter, but it is also very absurd. And I think one of the difficulties that even of my son's film that I showed you, people are not sure whether to laugh or be to reacting to the trauma that is implied by the narrative scenario. And the splitness of how even we react to those kinds of imagery actually told me, like, it was one point where I was like, I'm not gonna give this talk ever again, because once I was showing these images and I saw a young woman in the audience and she winced very visibly, that it was this very small gesture of pain in her face. And it showed me that I couldn't really, control, right? The nature of what and how people were seeing some of these images that I was talking about, given that frame. It's really hard to negotiate that line between talking about racial injury and pastiche, which is the very idea of something that is strange and funny. And so as I'm taking these questions, I thought I would end on the question of pastiche and have Cookie rolling in my background. As I said, you can actually talk to Cookie anytime you like on YouTube, and I'm just gonna mute her sound. And I'll take any questions from the audience and just have her rolling here. Here she is. I don't know what the Batman and Robin is. Oh, she's talking to someone about Batman and Robin online. These are the kinds of comments that poor Cookie, because she looks like this is what she's getting. So she should be, there she is, blinking away. Oh yeah, so this is obviously what they're talking about. When someone in the world is talking to this chat AI. So does anyone have any questions or would like to add anything to what I've said here today?